So my name is Cheryl Thompson. I'm founder and CEO of CADIA, Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement. A long background in automotive, Ford and American Axle and Manufacturing. And I'm going to introduce my panel, and then we're going to go ahead and get into this discussion. So be thinking about questions that you want to ask our panel. And I'm going to start with introducing Tony Pistonizzi. Tony works for American Axle and Manufacturing and is the head of electrification. Excuse me, I almost said the head of manufacturing. Next, we've got Ann Partington, and Ann is the director of Advanced Transportation Commercialization for the University of Michigan. Welcome, Ann. And then last over there, way far down, is Flora Stanfield, and Flora is the Chief Diversity Officer at Vitesco Technologies, one of the first Tier 1 suppliers that put in a Chief Diversity Officer. So we're so honored to have Flora with us today. So what I'd like to do is to start off with each of our panelists, giving you a little bit more insight into what they're doing now, what their background is, and why they decided to say yes to this panel and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Tony, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. I'm currently working in electrification and in corporate business development. I've had about a 25-year career that started at Ford Motor Company as a co-op student in the 1990s. I've worked predominantly in product engineering, product development, but also had some stints in operations, product management, and business leadership roles like the one I'm in right now. I wanted to speak about diversity, equity, and inclusion today because, as a leader, as a business leader, it's important for me naturally that we want to help develop people to really get their best potential, right? To fulfill their potential and get the most out of people and help people develop as much as possible. If you're a leader, that's something you naturally want to do, and this is a means and gives us some tools in our toolkit to help us do that. So I'm very passionate about this topic.
Awesome, thank you, Tony. Ann, how about you next?
Hello, everyone. I have about 25 years, 20 years of which was in the automotive industry across product development, global purchasing, and then program management, both on the technical and the business side. And from there, I took a huge leap. I went into the innovation space because it seemed like there was a greater opportunity to have technology be ready for market adoption and really put teams and processes around that. And then from there, I went to the University of Michigan and now run their Advanced Transportation Commercialization program. The reason that I said yes to this panel, which I can't imagine having any other answer, is that we are living through a tremendously transformative time. And so everything from our workforce, our talent that helps inform how we develop these technologies, to the technologies themselves and how we have operated through the pandemic, what technologies are needed for sustainability. There are huge opportunities and challenges. And so having a diverse, equitable, and inclusive process and people working on these is really critical to get it right for the future.
Awesome, thanks, Ann. And Flora.
Hello, everybody. Well, I've been around also for about 25 years, not necessarily all of them here in the U.S. I've been in the U.S. for 5 of those 25. The rest of my career I had in Latin America, working for oil and gas and chemical companies. I've been doing DEI for about 8 years and definitely passionate about it. And what I do love about it is the fact that if we really think of this as a business strategy, as a business imperative, we're actually making our companies better by taking care of our people, by making sure that we have diverse perspectives, we're being more creative, we're being more agile. In the end, we're bringing in better results, better business outcomes. And this is not me saying it. It's Deloitte, it's McKinsey, it's all of these consultant firms around the world saying we can bring better outcomes to our companies by doing this right. So that's why I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about people, and I'm passionate about making this a better world through, through the bottom line, right? So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Flora. So I'm just going to start with a couple of questions, and then, like I said, if you have questions, we want to make sure that we can hear those and include those as well. So Tony, you've been responsible for developing talent on the engineering side, and not only acquiring talent, but developing talent. Can you share a little bit about, well, let me back up. American Axle and Manufacturing has recently embraced diversity, equity, and inclusion in a pretty big way. And can you share how your view on developing that talent has changed as a result of that journey? Like, what stands out to you?
Yeah, let me tell a personal story. So, you know, I hired one of the first, in fact, the first director that I hired in the company a while back. I was interviewing, looking at candidates, and there's one particular individual who was a woman that I was considering. And at the time I was reading a book, and the book was called Moneyball, and it's about, you know, how people pick baseball players, right, and how we look at, you know, how they looked at all the wrong things in selecting people. They looked at the way they ran the bases, they looked at their swing, they looked at the way they threw the baseball, you know, and what they learned is none of that mattered. What mattered was, you know, their record in the minors was the best predictor of their record in the majors. You look at, you know, their accomplishments, you look at how they did. You don't look at the style. It's not about do they fit the part. So I happened to be reading that book at the time, and as I was making my, you know, decision about who to hire, this individual had the perfect resume. She had all the, you know, all the right experience, excellent references. I couldn't imagine her in that role, right? And what I realized was that's because of a lack of my imagination, because everybody that had been in that role before had been men, right? So could I imagine this person in that role after the interview? And I realized, you know, what I didn't have the language to describe at the time was something called unconscious bias, right? We talk a lot about unconscious bias, and you know, we made the right decision, thank God. I hired the individual, and she did an outstanding job. But I had to be intentional about that, about understanding that bias and making sure that I made an intentional decision to blunt that bias. And you know, that to me, you know, we talk about this thing of diversity and equity, but the reality is these unconscious biases that we have are real, and they have real impacts. So that was, to me, it made it very poignant. The other thing I would note is that, you know, she did an outstanding job, better than I could have imagined in the role. You know, our business objectives and these diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives are not at odds with each other, right? It's about developing the right talent, about bringing the right talent on board, and making sure that we don't let our biases in our process get in the way of doing that. So for me, very important, and I think a very poignant story to help me understand, you know, my own shortcomings and how to blunt those.
Thank you, Tony. That movie Moneyball, I've not read the book, but I watched the movie. So many good lessons. I love it. Thank you for that. Well, Anne, you've led teams across industry, across entrepreneurship, or entrepreneurial organizations, and across academia, right, for 20 plus years. Can you help us understand how DEI plays a fundamental role in technology development, especially in these uncertain times?
Sure. A couple things. First of all, with people are the beginning, the middle, and the end. They are the ones that take these projects through from concept to actual deployment. And so you always have to really remember that the more diverse the team is, the more informed it can be, the more inclusive it is, the more you can look at things such as risk assessment. You know, risk assessment is not a sexy topic, but unfortunately it is the barrier to a lot of technology development and innovation. So that would be a key point. The other area is that many of these technologies and teams will be developing systems-level solutions that will have cultural impact, social impact, environmental impact, and economic impact. So when you put that all together and think about what a sustainable path might be for that technology, it's extremely complex. A multidisciplinary set of folks coming together early in the ideation process, setting a strategy. Without a strategy, you can't have innovation. And then really looking at that with the mindset of, I hate to say this, but a researcher, right? Can we set a hypothesis? Can we set a strategy? Sort of rinse and repeat as there are challenges and outcomes. So those would be a couple of the areas that I would say are very key and important to technology commercialization.
Thank you, Anne. Very good. Flora, you have a long history of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You've been in the HR field for a number of years, but recently have been focused on DE&I, and most recently, over the last year, joined automotive. And thank you. We're really, really happy to have you in automotive. So I would love you to talk a little bit about the journey, right? We all start somewhere, and that journey evolves over time. And can you talk a little bit about the evolution of that journey and what's important in the start and then what's important as we evolve? Because we know we want to make sure that this is sustainable and systemic versus just check the box or performative. So what are some important things that stand out in your mind along that journey?
Right. So it's a great question, by the way. You're making me think right now. I would say that the most important thing is to understand who your counterparts are. Like, understand who your stakeholders are. Have deep conversations with them. Don't be afraid of asking, right? Because everybody starts at a different point, right? Everybody starts their journey in a different point, in a different mindset, with different biases, with a different life story that brought them to where they are. So having those starting conversations is a way to start the journey wherever people are at, and not necessarily imposing a journey of DE&I into someone that's not going to buy it if we don't start with where the pain is, right? So I would say that the first stop or the first step in the journey would be talk to your stakeholders, understand where they're at, and adjust your strategy to where they're at instead of trying to impose something on them. Which does not mean that there are not some topics that are going to be across the board important. When we talk about unconscious bias, as Tony was saying, when we talk about inclusive leadership and how can we make our leaders better leaders, basically, that's inclusive leadership. It's not more than that. There are things that are going to go across the board, but where everybody is in that understanding and in that journey is a different point. So that's where I'm saying you can have a broad global strategy of, okay, we're going to start, we're going to build ERGs, employee resource groups, we're going to work on our inclusive leadership skills, we're going to do this and that, but then understand where people are so that you can kick off the process at their level of understanding and maturity. And that allows you to kind of, make everybody progress at a different pace, starting from a different point, but everybody's going to walk in the direction that you want them to walk to. So I would say that's, for me, the biggest lesson. I've bumped my head into the wall a couple times, so I think that's, taught me to pause and to listen and to understand and respect that people come from different walks of life and have different experiences, and they're going to approach DE&I in a different way. Some may even feel uncomfortable about talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, because when we talk about underrepresented minorities and bringing opportunities to everybody, some people are going to say, okay, but I'm not a minority. I'm a white male. This is uncomfortable for me, right? And that's also very risky. I respect that. I respect that point of view, and it's something that we need to talk about. So, again, the humility to understand the other person's point of view, I think, would be the key for me to success in the journey.
I love that so much. Tom Kelly, in his opening remarks, was talking about customization. And that's kind of what you're talking about, right, is really customization. And I think that's so important because if anyone was around 20, 25 years ago like me, when we first started talking about diversity, it was just diversity. We weren't really talking about inclusion. We weren't talking about equity. And it was this blame and shame culture, right?
Absolutely.
And that is just not the way to approach it. So I'd like to shift into this whole idea of the future of work, right? We've been hearing a lot about that, and that's one of the biggest drivers in the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So much has changed over the last couple of years. When we were all having our prep call, and even a little bit this morning, we were just talking about, just in manufacturing in general, this whole idea of being able to work from home or to be more flexible wasn't heard of, right? You couldn't even talk about it, let alone do it. And we know now that there's different ways of, how we work, when we work, where we work, and the employee now has the power. So I'd love each of the three of you to talk a little bit about your view of the future of work. Where do you think we're going? What do you think is going to be important now for employers, for companies to think about in this whole idea of future of work?
Okay,
anyone can start, yeah.
Okay, I start. I don't mind. So many things there. I'll try to be crisp and clear. I think that the future of work is taking us to a lot less hierarchies and a lot more networks and people working kind of project-based work and in cells and networks much more than hierarchies. Hierarchies are not that important anymore, and they're going to be less and less important, moving into the future. So leaders that understand that and allow their employees to have this flexibility to connect with people from other departments, other business units, whatever, and work around these projects are going to be probably the companies that are going to be more successful in the future, because they're going to be able to adjust to whatever goes on that they don't even know yet, right? Because that's kind of the challenge, is adjusting and surviving a future that we're uncertain of, right? We don't know exactly what's going to happen, so we need to be ready for the uncertainty of whatever comes. Something else that I think from a diversity standpoint is a shift in the way that we think, or the way that we were bringing in and developing our people, is thinking, and I know that Tony liked this concept, so that's why I'm bringing it up, is the idea that we brought in people thinking, are they going to be a cultural fit to our company, right? Are they going to fit in, right? And that was kind of something that made a decision, and sometimes was like kind of the deal breaker. Now this person is not going to fit in, so we're not going to hire them. And lately, I have been hearing more and more, and actually trying to practice more and more, the concept of cultural add. Is this person going to add value to my culture because of their divergent thinking, because of their difference, because of the way that they operate, think, lead people, etc. So the shift between the cultural fit concept to the cultural add concept is something that I think is coming. And I think that little by little, all of us should start practicing, because that's what's gonna bring the creativity, the agility, the ability to face what we don't know in the future as companies. So I'll pause there because I don't want to take over the whole conversation, but I think those two are very important.
Awesome. Thank you, Flora. Anne?
I can go next. I think it boils down to a couple things, and you were so eloquent. I just see if I could add a few more things there. We're going through a time of having to radically change the way that we work. And then how do we sort of include what is the new ways of being radically inclusive to really think about these problems that we've never really had to face during our lifetimes? And then along with that, how do we provide a radical level of flexibility that addresses the needs and wants of our workforce, wherever they are generationally in that work span? And how do we help people sort of see the future for themselves inside of our companies and our cultures? Do they see themselves as belonging when they're in a meeting where there's 50 people and maybe they're not the person that's presenting? How do we reach down and across and help people really bring forward their contributions and acknowledge those contributions and help them feel like they're really part of the team? And then the last piece of it, I think, is around this sort of multidisciplinary need that we have to solve these really complex problems. And so how do we make room for what I would add to your comment, the dissenters, the folks that can come forward and say, have you thought about this? This is really clearly a risk because of A, B, and C that I may have experienced, or that I can bring to the table, or would like the team to consider. How do we provide that psychological safety to bring forward that and really aid our organizations in de-risking the work that we're working on a daily basis, and really help create that inclusive culture where people can feel like they belong?
I love that. You talk about belonging, and that is hardwired into our systems, right? It's a fundamental human need. And I was watching a TED Talk, and you may have heard this one as well, that when we don't belong, the same pain centers light up in our brain as do when we stub our toe or spill a hot cup of coffee. So I love that. So important to recognize. Tony, how about your view on the future of work?
Yeah, a few comments. First of all, flexibility is now becoming the price of entry, as we're seeing, right? You have to be flexible. The talent shortage is real. It's especially problematic in the automotive industry, where we're going through such a big transformation, and we need technical talent. We have to be flexible, and that's also a way to be more equitable and inclusive, because people that may not have been able to participate in the workforce because of personal circumstances, our flexible work schedules can allow them to do that. So I think that's definitely a positive. I think more and more of our work is going to be automated. right? There's going to be less prescriptive work, and the work that we are going to be engaged in as human beings is going to be more creative and more collaborative. So how do we create that collaboration and do that in a meaningful way, from a work from home or a hybrid work from home where we're talking to each other over Skype calls or Teams or whatever it may be. We've got to figure that out. And I think we've done a great job in the last 2 years, but I do think there's a danger, when we're not physically seeing each other, of people not being included. I think it's important that we're intentional about how we interact with our teams and interact with our colleagues, and we're going to have to make sure that we continue to find ways to include people. So I think it's going to be something we're going to have to be very intentional about. And there is a danger that we've got to be cautious about. But overall, I think the changes that COVID brought on to the way we work, I think are going to be a positive on our industry in general.
Yeah.